my name is Rune Vejle. I come from this small company called Urban Power that I started with two friends. We started this company about 12 years ago. I'm going to take you through a little journey of some theoretical things and also some examples of our work. And as an architect, I like to show images, so there will be a lot of images. So I hope you are awake this morning. Hopefully you already had some time to see a little bit of Copenhagen yourself. I know it's extremely cold these days, so it's actually nice to be inside and see images instead. But, well, we are this small company specialized in urbanization, and we're working in the cohesiveness between buildings, urban spaces, and urban planning. So our work span from larger urban plans down to smaller housing units in mainly in around Copenhagen, the greater Copenhagen area, the rest of Denmark, and a few other projects in Scandinavia. So a lot of what I'll show you today is this kind of Danish Scandinavian approach to how we work with urbanism. So here we are, the three of us, and we are kind of specializing a little bit in the landscape parts, the building things, and the urbanization. But we also cross over, all three of us. So the main thing for us is that we actually have a process where we are taking our clients and really leading them through these very complex processes, because that's really the essential of making urbanization. Some of these things takes 5, 10, 15 years. So a lot of the images I show, even after 12 years, are still things that are on the way and not finished yet. Of course, our goal is that we can contribute to a sustainable future. And how do we do that? Well, I want to just show you a few slides from the Danish media about how we perceive some of the issues that we are facing. One of them is the single-family houses, that they really use a lot of CO2. They take up a lot of CO2 emissions, and it's a very inefficient way of living. There are reports coming out that's showing that. We also have issues with demolishing buildings. You can see here in Carlsberg, where we are now, they actually kept a lot of the old buildings, which is also kind of complicated because you need to be very clever to renovate them in a good way. But we still have problems with tearing buildings down, because that's also contributed to a lot of the CO2 emissions. And then we have biodiversity issues, where we actually we are killing species. And one of the things we can do is to try to bring the biodiversity back into our cities, and that's also something that we're working with a lot in our company. Traffic, another issue, super important. Now we are slowly moving into electric cars and things, but we still have to consider how we deal with this in our cities. We are still increasing in the number of cars, the number of trips. Here it says that almost half of all shorter trips in Denmark is now by car. We used to be more on our bicycles and in the public transport, but that's going down. Then we have the climatic issues, of course. We have a lot of cloud bursts. We have flooding from the ocean in Denmark that we have to deal with, and these things are also increasing in these years and in the future. So there are a lot of issues to deal with when we are dealing with urbanization. And then finally, we also have an issue of the actual space that we're using, because in Denmark, as you might know, we are a very small country, and we have very limited space. So we actually have to be much more clever in the way that we're using our space. And I want to say a little bit more about that. When we started our company, we made this little study of how we're actually using our space in Denmark. And we read the Danish statistics and realized that each person in Denmark have an average about 50 square meters for housing, which is quite a lot, and it's still increasing. But when we're looking at this in an even bigger scale and we are looking at all the other buildings we also have, then we realize that we have 125 square meters of footprint buildings for each person in Denmark. And then when it gets really interesting is when we start to look at all the other urban areas that we have in between, the infrastructure, the parking, the leftover spaces. We actually end up with more than 1,000 square meters per person in Denmark of urbanized space. So we believe that we can do much better and we can use these areas in a much more clever way. So what we are doing when we are working with urban projects, we are trying to see how many problems can we find in this area, how many different possibilities, how many different potentials can we put together, because it's really in mixing in all of these things that we can create sustainable solutions. And I will get a little bit more into some examples of how we're doing that. In between the buildings, when we're working with the public spaces, it's a lot about how we integrate nature and biodiversity. It's about making climate adaptation in our cities and also using that in a recreational way. It's when we're working around the buildings, we can do a lot on using our building plots in a more clever way. We can optimize our existing buildings with more sustainable solutions and better materials with lower CO2 emissions. And then finally, I mean, our main topic when we work in the larger urban areas, we can optimize the areas. We can build more dense. We can build on top of other buildings, and we can create not only more dense cities, but also cities that gets more livable in this way. And one of the other issues that we are dealing with in this way is that how we connect different neighborhoods, because especially connections for soft traffic, pedestrians and bicycles are very essential in this way of working. Here's a map of Denmark, and I know it gets very specific for our country, but I think we are quite an interesting example, because you can see here the different colors. The brown colors are all the agriculture. Then we have the red ones that are the urban and infrastructure, and then we have the green ones, which is basically the nature. So our nature is very much under pressure in our country. And then when we look at statistics again, it's quite interesting and a little bit scary what is happening. Because from 2011 to 21, in 10 years, our areas for urbanization actually increased in Denmark with 217 square kilometers. It's actually like this island of Møn down here. Not that everything happened there, but in that scale. And that's just in 10 years. So we really have to stop up and think about how we're using these spaces. One of the huge discussions right now in Denmark is that the VE, all the solar panels and the windmills and all that we are installing, and it's taking up a lot of space. And people are really starting to be angry about it, especially in the countryside. And we expect that this island of Bornholm here will kind of be the size of how much this will take up in 2030. And then we have a good thing coming, which is that we are kind of transforming a lot of our farmland into nature, because we want to have more nature. And this is equal like to this island of Fyn here, that we will have to change from farmland into nature by 2045. So there is a lot of changes going on, and we have looked a little bit more, we try to look a little bit more clever into how can we actually work with these transitions. Because when we just add all these numbers up, we actually realize that we need a country that is up to 40% bigger. And we can't get that. So we really need to think about how we.
Could we take Greenland?
I will try to keep the Greenland conversation out of this one because that could be a very long discussion. Of course, we have some space there. We don't. Now we are talking only about Denmark itself, and we are thinking that why not start to think about instead of how much all this space, all these things take up. Couldn't we think about what kind of country we would create? See if we could design the country. So we looked at all the green areas in Denmark, which is very small, scattered parts, and we tried to make this. We tried to make this concept of what if we would make like a green spine that would go through all of the country. So actually, all of kind of the biodiversity areas and national area and parks and everything would be connected in one green spine. We also made another study of the infrastructure of Denmark. Denmark is about 6 million people. And if you compare it to Hamburg, which is our neighbor in Germany, there's just that metropolitan area of Hamburg is the equal size of all of Denmark. So in a way, you could think of Denmark as a city and not as a country. And we were investigating train connections, and we are having extremely inefficient train connections in Denmark, where it takes hours to go from one end to another. Can take a whole day almost if you want to go by train. So we were doing this concept to see what if we made like just one ring that would connect all of Denmark, and just by installing a known technology with a high-speed train, we could actually go from one end of the country to the other in 1 hour. So think about what that would mean to a country like Denmark. We have a lot of possibilities, and we should see if we can see all the positive things and work with that. Okay, that was kind of the overall. Now I want to dive a little bit more into the built environment. And of course, that's, as architects, we are trained in working with buildings, and that's also where a lot of our work is. When we look at the built environment in Denmark, we have 30% of CO2 emissions coming from the built environment alone. And when we scale it up and look at the cities all over the world, we realize that 70% of our CO2 emissions come from the cities, and 60% of Earth's population is living in cities, and the number is just increasing. So we can say urban areas, I mean, they are a problem, but they will also be the solution, because a lot of the solutions that we are working with, where we're trying to share functions, we are using green mobility, we can lower our emissions, we can work with the energy and resources in much better way. A lot of these things actually happens in the urban areas. So urban areas are essential for creating a sustainable future. But we really need to think in broad perspectives and really try to, again, take in as many problems and issues at the same time as we can. And now I want to give you some examples of how we are working with these things. When we started our company, we needed some projects that we could show to the world as a kind of showcase. So in the first couple of years of our company time, we were developing some ideas to present to the public. One of them was these old shipyards out here in the Copenhagen harbor, which is going to be transformed into a new urban area in the near future. And we came with this idea that instead of tearing these buildings down and starting fresh, we should transform them into a mega event space and a student housing area. So, because we at that time, and we still have, we have a really lack of especially student housing in Copenhagen. So what we thought here was that why not take 2,000 student housing units, and because these halls are so big, we could actually fit them into just the facades of the building, and then create this huge event space in the middle that we could give back to the city. We could actually solve the whole parking of the whole area by just putting one floor in this building and then having all the cars underneath, and then you will also get a fantastic space that you could give back to the city. So here we're trying, this is kind of a showcase of how we can merge as many functions as possible into one existing building, and then at the same time create something that has a very special identity. Because the identity is something that we believe is super important. Carlsberg here has a really strong identity because of all the historic buildings, and that really creates a space where people want to be. And that's something that is super difficult to do when you're just working from scratch in a new urban area. Here we are taking the metro into the building, and you can get off right inside the building. We are also working on things that get more political, and this is a thing that we are working with right now. So I'm jumping up until the last few weeks here, where we have worked with the municipality just north of Copenhagen, where the highway is going to be expanded. They need more lanes, and the city is kind of divided in two, and they have a lot of noise issues in this. So we've been working with this town to try to see if we can solve the noise issues, and then at the same time create a new station, the train station, to bring the public transport right into this center, and then of course make a nice urban environment where people can live in a more dense way. So this is ongoing at the moment, and it has not been published yet, so it's something that will come out later this year. I want to give you a few other examples of what we have worked with in the recent years. This Herlev Hørkær is very, not typical, but it's a typical suburb of Copenhagen that is being developed because there's a new light rail being installed in that area. So a lot of new housing is being built in these areas. Copenhagen is kind of full, and people are moving out to these areas. A lot of what is being built in these areas are not on a very good quality. So we're trying to work with this area in a way where we can give this a new character, more green spaces, and also work with the scale to bring things down into a human scale. So this is kind of the status of where we are now. It's half built, but the area used to be. How many
units would be in that type of project?
Sorry?
How many units would be in that type of a project?
I don't remember actually, but I think it's it's maybe 500 or something. Yeah. It's actually the whole area. So instead of we had the site here, but instead of just working with that site only, there used to be like an asphalt factory here, but then we kept the other office buildings, and we decided to try to create. Start with the green connections, so really work with nice ways of getting to and from the station and to the center, densifying these areas in between the existing buildings, and also actually building on top of some of the existing buildings. So in this way we get a much more dense area, but we still have space for the green spaces, and we create these very special environments where people can feel at home in their own way. So in this project, we also have a very special project, which is a part of it, and it's this one here, which was chosen to be in a showcase for 7 new Danish ways of working with housing. And we call it the symbiosis housing, because we're trying to create like a whole city in one existing building. So we are bringing in as many different functions as possible, kindergarten, an urban farm, and shared facilities between housing and office. So in a way, it's an office town, it's a housing town, and it's a farm that we are combining in one. And all these functions should then benefit from each other in this way that when you are staying in an office in this place, you can go to the roof to have a meeting in the vegetable garden or inside one of the village buildings. When you're living in the village, you can go down and use functions, the fitness facilities, the restaurant or whatever inside the office building. So in this way, we can create a whole city in one building. This was the building that what it looked like when we started, and this is what it's supposed to be in the future. We still need to do the thing on top, but we have made the transformation of the building with new offices, new connections, kindergarten, and the restaurant. And I mean, a lot of these buildings are placed in not only in Copenhagen but all over the world, and often we just tear them down and start from scratch and build something new with no identity. And we believe that if we can change these buildings with very small things and then add to them, then we can create something that gets this completely new look and something that will actually draw attention and also be a fantastic place to live. So here we have it, the village on top, community garden. The idea is that it's a kind of community housing where people share facilities also. So there's a common house, there's a common garden, and then you have your own individual unit. So this kind of way of living in community areas where you share functions, that's really something that is becoming more and more popular. Not only can you live in a smaller space, but you can also share facilities with others, and you can have a more social life. This was from an exhibition that is made from these 7 housing projects. Ours is here. Then there are 6 others, and they have been traveling around the world. I think they are actually in the US right now. They've been in Germany. So if you are lucky somewhere out there, you might find this exhibition. But the whole idea of creating communities is something that we try to work with a lot, because that's really creating some qualities that are being asked for in Denmark. This one is a village that we have made not on top of an old building, but in an area where there used to be an old school. So this area has been transformed. And here the idea is that all these units, I mean, people are living in quite small housing units, and then they have shared facilities where they can eat together and have a shared garden. So yeah. This is a quite Danish way of living, you can say, and it's becoming more and more popular. And then we are trying to move into building out of wood because the concrete is really one of the big sinners when we talk about CO2 emissions. And here we build it completely out of wood, and that means that the CO2 emissions get very drastically down. And Denmark is actually one of the only countries in the world where we have made super strict restrictions on our building industry now to how much CO2 emission we can have in our buildings. Yeah?
Is these like a wooden skeleton or is it like a CLT?
They are actually walls, not CLT, but they are walls that come with insulation and everything. So they're kind of prefabricated walls that are put together.
Are you guys experimenting with mass timber for going higher?
We have not done that in our company, but there is things like that going on in Denmark, but the fire issues has been really something that's has caused some difficulties for that. We have another project where we are working with lightweight concrete, which is also kind of reducing CO2 a lot. I'll show that this actually this building here. But I mean, the concrete industry is still very, very strong in Denmark, and it's really difficult to change it because we have a lot of building in the usual way. But a project that we're working with right now is in this office park outside of Copenhagen, which has been planned in the 1970s, where we didn't think so much about how much space we had. And there's actually a lot of space in between these buildings, a lot of huge parking areas, a lot of green areas that is not being used in a very efficient way. And we're working with this area over here. Now we're starting the first phase, which is creating some buildings, some housing in this area. And what is interesting is that these office buildings here, they are not super attractive, but our client that we're working with here, they calculated that they can actually get 50% more for their office buildings because they may build some housing buildings around them because it becomes a more interesting space. So right now we are working with this area here and a building 10,000 square meters of housing, which is going to start construction next month. And of course, you can say it's quite dense, and we're building up to 6 floors, which is kind of dense in Danish standards. This is all built in light concrete blocks, which have a really, really big reduction of CO2 compared to the traditional concrete buildings. And here we also we are mixing a lot of different units. We are putting in different shared facilities and creating this kind of community feeling.
What size units are going in there? 1 bedroom for large?
They are between 1 bedroom and 4 bedrooms. 3 bedrooms. We call it four room because we do the living room. It's 3 bedrooms.
And any commercial space, so like a supermarket, a dry cleaner, the sort of facilities that people would need.
For this area, it's just this little part here. But we are working with the client also own more buildings, and the idea is that together with the municipality, this whole area needs to be transformed. So there will also be densified with supermarkets. There's actually a supermarket over here, but the whole idea is that this area should be transformed. But the difficult part in this is to get the municipality on board because they have a lot of saying in this. So, I mean, the private clients, they're ready, but it's actually more the municipalities that are holding back a little bit because the more housing being built, the more kindergartens they need to build, the more schools they need to build, and
Infrastructure
yeah.
to support the people. Yeah.
That's
Very
kind of
different of the I drive in, I come to the office, I'm there for 9 hours and I go home versus I live there and I work there and I have to do my groceries and my kids need to go to school and everything else.
Yes. So another plan that we have been developing here in the Copenhagen area, inside Copenhagen, in the harbor, in the south of the harbor, is a project called Stejlepladsen. It's under construction at the moment. It was a competition that we won. And in a way, it's a bit interesting because it looks messy. And that's the whole point with this. There used to be this messy area here, which is kind of a self-grown fishing village. And then the city decided to develop this land because they're selling public land to pay for the metro of Copenhagen. That's a business strategy that they have been working with for many, many years. And when we started this project, the people down there, they had these huge banners saying, we don't want any new construction in this area. And the people were super angry that we were going to build in this area. So we tried to think of a way to create something which could kind of connect to these areas instead of trying to make something that faced away from them. This was the existing area down there today. It's hard to believe that we actually have these kind of areas in Copenhagen. We had a Brazilian architect at our office working in this area at that moment, and he thought it looked like a favela and thought that we should just demolish everything. But we said, no. There's actually some quality here. So we investigated how these areas that are there already are actually super interesting in this way that they're kind of a labyrinth, and they have their kind of small private spaces in between the buildings. And we tried to merge that into our housing blocks. This is kind of the traditional housing blocks of Copenhagen. And then we said, well, we need to create these, to break it up completely and make small pockets in between where people can actually meet. And then we take all the cars out of this area and we give them this possibility of bringing the public life right out into the spaces in between the buildings. So the whole idea is that, because it also really creates this nice environment when you can have these small pockets inside your housing area where the houses can just open up and you can bring your life out into the street and have your kids playing. So now it's under construction, and it will definitely be very, very different than any other community in Copenhagen. This is a student housing project that is also being built right now that we have designed in that master plan. We designed the master plan first. Problem is that there is still a lot of concrete in this because now we have the nice materials on the outside, but there's still a lot of concrete inside. Another way of working with, I don't know how much time we have left, but do we have 5 minutes more? Or? Yeah. Another project that we won in Norway is this kind of nature-integrated housing, which gives identity to the housing area in a different way, because of course here we have the big hills and the big forests right outside the town, and we are trying to bring that into to this area. So the way we were doing it was, this was what the municipality suggested to make some classic housing blocks. We said, well, let's try and scale it down to reflect the context, bring in the nature. So make kind of a way that the nature eats its way into this, and then create this very fragmented housing, which will then be more kind of a nature-based way of living. So we won this competition, but unfortunately it was then sold to a developer, and they're actually building something which doesn't look quite like this, unfortunately, even though...
How much more expensive is something like this rather than your typical concrete blocks?
Well, of course, it's every time you do something that is different from this, it costs more money. But
10% more, 20% more?
I wouldn't say, I couldn't give a number on this because it depends on a lot of things. But I know in this one, just by having these small setbacks, they complain a lot about that. And also that each block is different, also gives difficulties. So what we're doing in some of these projects like this one here, we're actually trying to create it super simple. It's actually the footprints of the buildings are the same. Even though there are 7 different types of housing units in them, we set up a very efficient plan so they can actually build something that is complex but in a simple way. And that's kind of the trick to do these things. Once you start to do these kind of things, it gets relatively expensive.
That's
Yeah. I want to show you just the largest project that we ever worked on, and it was in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it started right before the war, and even though it continued for the first half year, they put it on hold.
Una,
Yeah?
just, I think that Ferdinand has a question maybe.
Just a question to the other kind of apartments or housing. What kind of people are you looking to move in? Who can afford? Is it to buy? Is it to rent? What kind of class of people are?
What project are you thinking of? Was it this one or the?
All the different before.
Yeah, well, it's.
What kind of clientele is coming to buy his houses or rent?
Yeah, you can say it's a mix of private and rental. A lot of the developments in Copenhagen right now are rental because big pension funds build and other big companies build a lot of the housing and then they rent it out. And it's actually supposed to be for normal people. So as families, singles, old people, we're trying to see by making different housing units in the same area that we get the areas to be as diverse as possible.
Isn't it true that also Denmark you have like this law that when you build, there is something that needs to be on special treatments for? I can't remember the Danish word for it even. Yeah, like
Affordable housing.
affordable housing. So there's like some percentage needs to be like that, right?
Yeah. One of the biggest problem for housing in Copenhagen is that the houses, the prices have gone up. I think maybe 300% in 10 years.
Well, that's global.
Yeah.
That's everywhere.
So the way we are dealing with it in Copenhagen is that we have this affordable housing that's that you can sign up for, and then it's for everybody actually. It's not only for certain incomes, but everybody can do it. But now that we have a new law in Copenhagen where the politicians can force developers to build 25% of that type. So what happened in the last 5 years was that they built the first 75% and then they left the last plot empty. Now they're trying to do it differently, so they're forcing them to build also this affordable housing in the beginning. But even to build private housing is a problem because most of the things that are being built is rental, and that means that we don't have a lot of the amount of ownership is going down. So the big pension funds, they want to get as much as possible out of it, of course, and they set these very high rents, which is also the reason why a lot of the projects that we are working with now is actually in just outside of the Copenhagen center, because the prices are lower there.
There's one more question here.
Yeah?
Hi. First of all, very impressive what I'm seeing here, and thank you for that. I was wondering, these projects, for how many years is it built? Because it's probably not forever like every housing, and over time. How many years would certain housing be there?
You mean this is like?
You mean for how long they're supposed to stay there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, we say at least 100 years in Denmark.
And is there also a good way of dismantling then the buildings and reusing the materials?
Well, when you are calculating your life cycle analysis, you always count them for 50 years. And you can say the very old buildings in Copenhagen, they stay often 200-300 years. And the newer buildings, they go away. So we really have to consider how we build the newer buildings also. So they are, you can say there are two ways of going. You can either make them very high quality, make sure that you make something that will be staying for a long time. There's some good examples here in Carlsberg with nice brick facades. You never know, of course, but then of course you have to be able to transform them and then dismantle them also and take them down and build them in new areas. But that's the last thing is something we haven't worked with almost no projects like that in Denmark at the moment. This was a competition. There was never a winner announced, but we were one of the last 5 teams where we were dealing with a whole new city for 300,000 people. So this was in this river area. So we really tried to create a whole city where everybody have access to nature. So you're living in a dense city, but you have water and you have green spaces everywhere in the city. So that strategy means that you have these green fingers that's coming into every little house in this area. And from all units, you will be able to go directly into a green or blue space. That's, of course, something you can do when you're creating a whole new city from scratch. Unfortunately, this was put on hold. We'll see what happens there, but it's not going on at the moment. The last thing I want to show is just a very small thing, because I think now I talked a lot about the big projects, and it's also important how we deal with our own little houses. And I had this project with a very difficult client, my wife, and myself. And we were facing the rising sea levels, and we were kind of afraid that this would happen. So we decided that we would try to do something about it. The problem in Denmark is that you can actually not raise up your buildings. You have a fixed level at the moment where you can build, and you cannot build taller than that. So what we decided to do was to build like a maximum shelf, and then put in the floors and higher levels inside the building. So should we have a flooding, then the building is actually prepared for working with that. And then we have terraces all around the house also, so we can also be outside when the water comes. So I think what is interesting about this is also that we built it ourselves, actually, over the last 3 years. So I once had a teacher in architecture school that said all architects should try to build their own house, then they know what it is. So that's what we did, and now I feel like I'm kindly like a full educated architect, because I know everything from the big plans to the very small things, how to screw things together. I think that was the last one. Thank you.